Councillor Barber.
E tātua kaharawa, tēnei hoki mātou mihi nei ki a koe, i tēnei ata. Kei te tuku whakawheta atu rā ki a koe, o tēnei huihuinga, o te kauni hero here taunga, ko tatu mai nei te kōrero i ngā tini kaupapa. No reira, uhi mai tō wairua tapu ki wānganu i a mātou i tēnei rā, kia tutuki pai a mātou i nei mahi, mo te oranga o tō tātou nei hapori o here taunga whānui te take. Heavenly Father, we come before Thee at the opening of our council meeting. We give thanks for the blessings that we have. We ask Thee to watch over us as we discuss important matters pertaining to the Hastings district, that we may be able to do so in a manner pleasing unto Thee. Tēnei tamata nei ino i kia koe, kia whakatūwhera pai tēnei huihuinga, I rungi te ngā tapu o ihu karaiti tō mata kai whakora. Āmene. So our song is the vaccination song. Get your kupu. I saw the chords, so yeah, I think we got it sussed. Vaccinate before it's too late. Vaccinate, look after your mate. Vaccinate, stay alive. Vaccinate if you want to survive. Get the needle, it's not sore. Get the needle, don't worry no more. Vaccinate, you haven't heard. Vaccinate, it doesn't hurt. Vaccinate, vaccinate. Come on.
Kia ora koutou. That was awesome, team. Fantastic and a great video this morning. Thank you everyone who came a bit earlier to get that video made. And on that note, can I acknowledge the amazing mahi that's going on across our district by health, by community leaders, everyone pulling together to ensure that our community stays safe and gets vaccinated. And when we hear of what's happening in Tauranga at the moment, we know how vulnerable everybody's getting tested there. And so we just need to all work together to help our community. So ngā mihi nui, tēnā koutou katoa. Can I have apologies and leave of absence? I have apologies from Councillor O'Keefe. Any leave of absence? Councillor Sholem.
Yes, Your Worship. Leave of absence from Thursday until Thursday next week, the 7th, until Monday the 11th, to take care of a sick relative.
Thank you, Councillor Sholem. Any other leaves of absence? Thank you. I'll put that move from the chair. They be adopted. Seconded, Councillor Lawson. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you. That's carried. Conflicts of interest. If we just can manage our conflicts of interest as we normally do as we come to them, each item. The confirmation of minutes, item 4, previously circulated for the council meeting of the 26th of August 2021 and the 9th of September 2021, moved by Councillor Watkins, seconded by Councillor Dixon. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you, that's carried. Can I just make a mention today, with council being social distanced, and which is so important to us in level 2, we do have councillors sitting on the outskirts that our community may not be able to see. We have Councillor Watkins, Councillor Travis, Councillor Ollie, and Councillor Corbyn. Pardon? And Councillor Harvey and Councillor Sears. I'm not sure if those you can be seen, but definitely the wing ones people can't be seen. So they are all here, and everybody has been social distance. Thank you. I'm going to now move to the item on the agenda that our staff, our community, our councillors have been working so hard on through the last 8 weeks. I'm moving and bringing forward item number 9 as the first item in today's agenda. So I would like to invite the Chief Executive and his team who have done an enormous amount of work, both through the community engagement, through understanding our assets, through working with peers across the region to bring this paper to you today. Welcome, Mr. Bickle.
Morena koutou katoa, tēnā koe koro matua, tēnā koutou katoa I ngā rangatira o Te Kaunihira Arohi o Hirataunga. Good morning, Your Worship and Councillors. Look, I will take what is a really comprehensive report as read, but would like to make some introductory comments. Hastings knows better than anyone the need for Three Waters reform, given the events of Havelock North in 2016 with the water contamination event, and the subsequent government inquiry that made a number of recommendations for change to the Three Waters sector. We had to respond to Havelock North, and we have supported many elements of the Three Waters reform: the establishment of Taumata Arowai as an independent drinking water regulator, the need for clearer and better standards in drinking water, fresh water reform and consequent changes to wastewater and stormwater to ensure public health and better environmental performance. The government has proposed significant reform to how Three Waters service delivery is managed. The creation of 4 multi-regional public water entities that would come into effect in July 2024. We would be, under this proposal, placed in Entity C, a region that would cover the top of the East Coast to the top of the South Island, the Chatham Islands, that would bring 1 million New Zealanders into this entity structure comprising 21 councils and 20 iwi. This is a really significant proposal for reform and would be one of the biggest sector reforms in a generation. We've been provided 8 weeks to assess the proposal and provide feedback to the government by today. As Her Worship Mayor Hazelhurst said, over the last 8 weeks we have worked really hard to analyse this proposal, its merits, its implications, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank Craig Thew, Craig Cameron, Bruce Allen and their teams for all of that work. I'd also like to acknowledge your hard work and the many workshops that we've had over the last 2 months. And it's felt like over the last 8 weeks we haven't done anything other than talk about Three Waters reform. Our community has also been very engaged in this topic, and we've heard from them, you individually as councillors, over 800 responses to a survey, Facebook Live sessions. The paper is comprehensive, but it does not seek any decisions today. It seeks to give feedback to the government on their proposed reform for Three Waters service delivery. The paper sets out our council and community feedback in 11 thematic areas and seeks your authorisation for the Mayor and myself as Chief Executive to submit our feedback to government today. In summary, it provides feedback to the government on their proposed reform. It suggests an alternative that's not the status quo of a regional model for Hawke's Bay, but it states really strongly that whatever happens from here, the government must consult with our community. They are the ones that have paid for these assets over generations. Assets in terms of its significance that in a Hastings context is worth $1.1 billion. They deserve the right to have a say in what happens to those assets. But I'll, on that note, now hand over to you, Your Worship and Councillors, for your consideration of the paper today.
Ngā mihi nui, kia ora koutou. I guess this is quite an emotional day for us. As we lived through the Havelock North water crisis with our community, we went through a government reform and we went through a government inquiry, then a government reform. This is one of the biggest issues facing our country, both today and for future generations. Since 2016, our water has been our #1 priority for our council to rebuild our trust and confidence in our community, to show them and make sure that we were delivering safe drinking water to all of our communities, 7 small rural communities, 2 town centres and a city of Hastings. Wastewater, drinking water and stormwater are significant challenges for local government throughout New Zealand. Our investment, and we are unique because we are ahead of many areas in New Zealand, have invested over $1 billion in this area. And that is why it is so important to us. That is why whatever model or whatever proposal is taken forward needs to be the best proposal for our people and our community. Our community have spoken out loudly in this pre-consultation period, and they've all come up with the same areas of concern. In fact, those concerns have been repeated across New Zealand. Having our own local voice in decision-making, protecting our local assets, ownership, having a co-governance and management with iwi, having control to manage our growth needs that Hastings is facing, both today and in the future, and a model that is affordable for our people and is efficient and is safe. Through their feedback, they have told us that the government model will not meet their needs or aspirations for today and in the future. We agree that we need to change how we deliver the 3 waters. We know that this is a big burden on local government. We cannot do it on our own without our central partnership with central government. We know that climate change, managing our fresh water, are bringing massive challenges for us, as we've seen in local and recent events of a storm that has happened recently in our region. That is why for the last 18 months, we have been working with our regional partners, 5 councils across the bay, to look at a regional proposal to see how we could bring affordable, safe 3 waters to our people. We support the change in regulation, taumata arawai, and stronger standards to deliver the 3 waters for our community, and we support an economic regulator to ensure investment in the 3 waters takes place. However, as Nigel has just said, any change in future management or governance of the 3 waters must be consulted with our community for their decision making. And this is the most important item that we as a council and you as councillors will face representing your community at this time. Kia ora koutou katoa. I now invite any questions, followed by comments to any of the officers on the paper in front of you. Councillor Nixon.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. I'm not sure whether I'm asking this of Mr. Hugh, the Chief Executive, or yourself. Yeah, 5 years ago it was a disaster. This is just one part of the report that was prepared by government looking into the event. And government have come back to us with the proposals that we're considering today. And I think there's been a lot of interest. We've had a lot of emails come in from members of the public who generally find themselves very poorly informed about what's going on, not as a result of council actions, but more government. So the question I've got is, what are we doing now to help or make government reassess this proposal? That's beyond the proposal we've got to them, but what public relations, what public consultation are we asking for at the next stage, and what sort of timetable are we working to? Because as I understand, government was planning to have this all passed this current year. Well, we're rapidly running out of time. So could I just have a sort of update on those 2 points?
I'll start through you, Your Worship, and then hand to Craig through if I miss anything. I think to answer your question, Councillor Nixon, first and foremost, what the council has done over the last 8 weeks, I think is a pretty reasonable job and not a leading way to actually provide the facts of the government's proposed reform out to our community. As you know, we've had, as the report outlines, over 800 responses to that survey. In addition to the many emails that councillors have been receiving, a Facebook live session, we've made the decision to leave that survey open and continue to have more feedback coming in. But at this point, this ends this phase. We, along with every other council in New Zealand, are providing feedback to government as requested by the 30th of September. It is uncertain what the next steps in the process are. Minister Mahuta has indicated that Cabinet will then, there will be assessment of all the feedback, and we should expect to hear sometime in October, but the process from this point on is not certain.
Could I just add one little bit to the question I thought I'd ask at the time? Local government New Zealand, how are they representing us and all the councils in New Zealand, considering it has not been well received so far?
There has been, Local Government New Zealand have, and a number of you have been part of this, attended many webinars, many seminars online, and they have also been working with the government to look at, they have a steering group made up with members across New Zealand to inform the government. Councillor Sears.
Thank you, Your Worship. A question and clarification, please, mainly for our community. The opt-in, opt-out issue that we've received, hundreds and hundreds of emails on, can you just please clarify, mainly for our community, actually that we're not at that point and what those two things mean? And secondly, could you also please give your opinion on how open you believe the government to be to our submission, because we've had many workshops. The paper's very big, but our community probably need to know we've had hours and hours and hours of workshops on this submission and on these papers, so we're really well versed in them, and they're incredibly thorough, and the feedback I believe to be incredibly useful for government. So if you could just give some clarity on how the government have feedback to you that they'll be receiving and considering our submission.
Through you, Your Worship, the Minister for Local Government, Minister Mahuta, has been clear in all of her engagement with the sector to this point that she sees this as an opt-in, opt-out process for councils. We are not being asked at this stage to make a decision to opt-in or opt-out. To be very clear, as the paper attempts to do, under the law as it stands today, councils cannot choose to transfer their assets to another entity without it triggering very clear provisions in the Local Government Act that would require us to run a special consultative process, a formal amendment to long-term plans that this council has adopted. That is the law as it stands today. Whether the government, in receiving all of this feedback, allows that process to happen or adopts another process, we are uncertain and unclear of at this time. What we do know is that the Minister has been clear that she sees this as an opt-in, opt-out process. As the law stands today, you could only make that decision to opt-in or opt-out through the processes that are defined in the Local Government Act as it stands today.
And if I could just add, Councillor Sears, that as you probably know and you have been part of, and as our council has, that we have been working for the last 2 years on a Hawke's Bay model that would meet the needs of our community, and many councils around New Zealand are offering solutions to the government, of their own solutions that they see and consider could work for them. So we are one of those. We will be informing. We are the last council in our councils across the region to adopt a feedback today, and we will be rewriting to the Minister to say that we have a united region. We will continue to work on our regional model, and sending her another letter. Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Firstly, a huge vote of thanks to the authors of this report. It's phenomenal in content and detail, so well done. I only want a clarification around one word, really, and it's in recommendation B. It's the last bullet point. The use of the word co-governance. Co-governance to me has a number of meanings. It can mean collaboration. It can mean joint 50-50 control. Or it can, like a co-pilot or a co-driver. It means that one party or other can take over control. So I'm concerned about the use of the word co-governance, and I'd prefer it to be called collaboration, because that's got a finite meaning.
If I can comment, obviously the government is proposing a co-governance model with iwi through the proposed governance model. In a Hawke's Bay context, through your worship, we have worked, as Mayor Sandra said, very collaboratively over 2 years with our colleagues across Hawke's Bay, but we've also worked on a model that's been through all the councils, including this council, that was co-designed with iwi and mana whenua in Hawke's Bay around a cultural case that saw co-governance and management. To be very frank with you, I think that is some of the work that needs to be done around what does that actually look like in practice, and I don't have a detailed answer to what that looks like, but the work that has been done to date in co-design with iwi and mana whenua across Ngāti Kahungunu has been around a co-governance and management model.
So if I just may follow up. So you don't believe a better word would be collaboration?
No.
So we do co-governance across many, many regional activities at the moment. And Mr. Thu, you might like to just, you've probably got them at your fingertips.
Thank you, Your Worship. Probably the critical and most aligned one in the Three Waters space that Council has co-governance with is the Tangata Whenua Joint Wastewater Committee, which has representatives both from Ahiriri and Hiratonga, with councillor representatives on there with its own particular terms of reference and roles and responsibilities. So in the Three Waters space, that would be one example, but as Chief Executive Mr. Bickle says, the work through the culture case of working through with local mana whenua, tangata whenua, and the joint councils around what co-governance would mean in a Hawke's Bay context is a piece of work to still complete.
Thank you.
And the mayors are meeting with Chairman of Ngāti Kahungunu on Friday, Ngāhiwi Tongwana, and also planning a hui a iwi with our iwi, our mana whenua leaders to look at what this model could be for Hawke's Bay. Councillor Travis.
Since I was first elected to council, water has been the big issue, and so it was a big issue before the government reforms because of the Havelock North water crisis. But of course, in preparation for this proposed change, we have been inundated with information. Only one part of that proposal has captured the public imagination. They seem to have overlooked the fact that this is three waters. Everybody is obsessive about one water, and that's the drinking water. And I think we're all really clear about drinking water standards and what would potentially be required. But what concerns me, I am not sure that either we or the community has a grasp of what would potentially be required for the other two waters, particularly around waste. So because we don't know about the standards, we have no idea about the potential cost of such a thing. And I guess my question is to Mr. Thew, are we any clearer to knowing exactly what's going to be required for either of the other two waters?
Through you, Your Worship. Thank you for your questions, Councillor Travis. Very good point. It is all three waters, and this council's done a lot of work in the drinking water space, and there's still more work to do. This council is fortunate enough to have a wastewater treatment plant that has a consent. which is a significant potential liability. At this point in time, we are working to what we know in terms of current standards, but we do not know what's coming around the corner in terms of potential. And the paper sets out, I guess, the far right of that is if, for example, in years to come, coastal discharges, such as ours through our long outfall, was restricted, that would create a significant cost to the communities of both Hastings and Napier. And we'd have to work through how to do that. And I guess in terms of taking the Hawke's Bay model and the thinking inside that, one of the big efficiencies talked about by amalgamation is capital investment. And that does rely, a lot of that efficiency comes around sharing assets. Hastings and Napier are close enough to do those things. However, Hastings and Wellington is a little bit harder for us to share a wastewater treatment plant. The other key water is stormwater, and it's fair to say that is probably one of those ones that is most unknown up and down the country. Wastewater, we can do scenarios, and a lot of the government's forecast of expenditure, it's less drinking water, the big increase, it is wastewater. Stormwater is got more uncertainty, both in terms of future response to climate change from a quantity, but also quality, and we all know that we need to improve the level of urban stormwater runoff quality into our Ki Awa.
Thank you, Mr Thu. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to the officers for this paper and also, the rigorous critiquing of the government's three-water proposal. My question is that, to date, the government hasn't really provided adequate information to our community, and it's been severely lacking. So what I'd like to know, after this feedback and feedback from other local governments, is there an indication that they're going to provide more information in an open, transparent and robust way to our community?
Through you, Your Worship, to be determined, but it would be fair to say our feedback and the feedback that we've seen from many other councils is providing that feedback and asking the government to do just that. I think that the observation of the last 8 weeks is that council has had to basically provide that information to our community to seek their views and be able to provide some feedback. And without being political, because that's not my job, I think that community has got more from the information than we've provided than the millions of dollars that have been spent on cartoon TV advertisements in terms of communities being able to truly understand the detail of the proposal from government. But clearly one of the key elements of our feedback that's contained in the paper is the need for the next stages to include much better information to communities and for communities to be able to have their say on the options.
Thank you. Councillor Barber.
Yeah, kia ora tātou, just want to tautoko ngā mihi kia koutou ngā kaituhi o tēnei reporter, the authors of the report. I think it's a fantastic report and very comprehensive. A lot in the report has been made around the differences in the modelling between WICS and our modelling. Specifically, I guess, around the debt to revenue, how it takes on debt to our three waters rather than the council full debt, which is I read that's the main difference. Have we queried the government on that? Because that would seem to me a major difference or shortcoming in the modelling, and what was their reply? I guess that's one question. I've got a follow-up question after, if I can.
If I start again, Craig, so I guess the key thing is we've been able to ask questions over the last 8 weeks. We've asked a range of questions and we haven't yet had responses to those questions from government. As the paper says, probably the biggest thing that we're concerned about that's overstating the level of investment required in Hastings is what the WICS modelling has suggested as the level of investment that's needed on levels of service and enhancements. So the WICS model, it hasn't drawn on any of the detailed asset information that Craig and his team produced last Christmas. The best that we can see is it's a generic model, but basically it's saying that over the next 30 years, Hastings needs to spend $1.9 billion on levels of service and enhancements. We've asked questions, haven't had a response, but we just cannot comprehend how you could possibly spend that amount of money. And the delta between when Craig and his team of engineers said, if you were completely unconstrained and you could spend what you thought you needed to on levels of service and enhancements, the best they could come up with was, and Craig can answer this, was in the hundreds of millions, certainly not $2 billion. In effect, we would have to spend, on addition to our investments, $65 million a year on levels of service enhancements, and we just cannot. So our view is that the model has produced a number, probably based on the size of our geography and our coastline, but is it a number that we don't understand and we think is not credible, and therefore skews the comparisons on the costs that would be faced by Hastings households. So that is our feedback, but to answer specifically your question, we have posed that question and we've had no response.
Thank you. Councillor Watkins.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Responses and submissions, many points were raised, but the one in particular that seemed to get the most attention was, what is this going to cost me, the householder? And this is the question that I want to ask if we have received an answer from the government. In their proposal, they suggested that in 2051, 30 years out from now, it's going to cost you, the householder, $1,260. And if we don't join the scheme, it's going to cost you, the householder, close to $4,000. Now, I put to you, if you can model figures like that, you have to know what the regulations are, which is going to determine what the infrastructure is you're going to have to invest in. And we've asked, what are the regulations? And the government haven't told us yet. So they can tell us what the price will be 30 years out. And when we ask them what the price might be from 2024, every year ongoing, they say, we can't tell you. Well, what would you think if they said that? You'd think perhaps there's a bell curve that is so terrible in the early years of the government proposal that they don't want to make it public. So they'll tell you something 30 years out, and we know what happens to prices and estimates 30 years out. So my question is, have they come back and given us a price pathway from 2024 onwards?
Not at this, through your worship, not at this point. And I think this is the challenge always with models and assumptions. And we do that as well in terms of trying to forecast. So if we take things to, again, the facts that we know today it costs a Hastings householder $840 for 3 water services. In 10 years from now, on the long-term plan that you adopted and the assumptions that you made and that we signed off our capital investment, that number will be $1,531 in 2031. There is no doubt that the direction of travel is that the level of investments in 3 waters is going up. The question that we keep coming back to, though, is the set of assumptions. So we are saying we have no confidence in the WICS modelling that produces a number of $4,500 cost to Hastings household, because it is premised on an assumption that we're going to spend $1.9 billion on enhancements. So those are the facts, and I guess this is the difficulty around models are based on assumptions, and we've asked questions and haven't had responses. Directionally, costs are increasing, but we think that the current government proposal and the WICS modelling overstates the costs and therefore skews comparisons with other options.
Thank you. Craig, did you want to add anything? No? Okay. Councillor Sholem.
Thank you, Worship. And again, echoing the words of my colleagues, thank you to the staff who have done such a huge amount of work on this, not just on this report, but also in the build-up to this whole process. All of this feels very cart before the horse. I echo Councillor Watkins' concerns in terms of lack of clarity around standards and also lack of clarity around actual costs as a result. My question that I have is regarding the recommendations. In the recommendations B, the final point, we state that there's a preference for a Hawke's Bay Three Waters service entity that will deliver scale and efficient benefits for Hastings. My question is around, mainly for our community, are there any barriers to that government can assist us with or hinder us with in terms of that preference?
Absolutely. So, you know, we have models now. We know that in order to meet what is coming towards us, we need to have support. And last year when we took our Hawke's Bay review to the Prime Minister, we were supported with $20 million towards our infrastructure. Went a very long way towards helping us do our three waters, upgrade our drinking water plan. And so, you know, we cannot do this on our own. So to meet whatever standards are coming our way, we know this is going to be unaffordable for local government. So, Nigel, did you want to add anything?
Just to say that in terms of what, through you, Your Worship, the council is requesting, along with other councils in the region, is the ability to continue to engage with the government on a Hawke's Bay Three Waters entity. To be clear on the legal advice that's been received today, to date, in order to realise the benefits of a Hawke's Bay Three Waters entity and balance sheet separation, we would need government support to make legislative change to be able to give effect to the Hawke's Bay model. So it's probably a range of things that in an ideal world we would be able to engage, sit down and negotiate with the Crown from whether it's funding or legislative change in order to give effect to a regional model.
Thank you, Worship. And just to follow up to clarify, so that means that if government chose not to support this community's call for a regional, collaboration to take care of our waters, then we would be hindered in proceeding because legislation is required to enable that.
Well, it's the proposal that is in front of us, which is Entity C. So that is the direction at the moment. That is what's on the table from the government. We are taking a different proposal. We're asking to meet with the government and work through that, what that could look like for us. We are continuing with our work on our regional model to test assumptions, to see if we've missed peer review, Morrison Lowe review from last year, and we're going to continue doing that work. But we would like to have that conversation. That will be in our submission if we can keep talking to the government about how this could work for our region.
Thank you. I absolutely support us having a strong call within our submission for government to remain open to all options. Thank you.
Councillor Sholem. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, and again, thank you to everybody that has been putting together all of this mahi, and at the same time we're doing our own water infrastructure work. So there's a lot that has been going on. My question is around the Hawke's Bay Three Waters entity and our process going forward with that. Will they be working in tandem, or are we waiting for a response back from government? And how will the engagement process of that carry through? Will we be putting forward to the Hawke's Bay community what is the best solution, or will each part of the region be putting forward and consulting with their own communities? Because again, whatever one we are looking at, Hastings and Napier, potentially propping up other parts of the region, and that is a really important part to actually communicate. Thank you.
Through you, Your Worship. Yes, Councillor Harvey, you're right. I mean, the work that's been done to date on the Hawke's Bay Three Waters model, if you lift it up to the principles of everyone has the right to be able to access safe drinking water, Three Waters infrastructure that protects our environment, the work that's been done to date clearly over time in aggregating the assets in Hawke's Bay, the households of Napier and Hastings helps meet the costs that Central Hawke's Bay and Wairoa can't meet over time. That is the essence of aggregation. It's a smaller version of what the government is proposing to do. We are the last council in the region to consider our feedback to government. That's been completed by Wairoa, Central Hawke's Bay and Napier. Subject to the council's consideration of this paper today, the intention is for the 4 mayors and the chair of the regional council to communicate the Hawke's Bay position to the community on Saturday by way of an advertisement in the Hawke's Bay today. And to be clear, the process for establishing a Hawke's Bay Three Waters asset owning entity would require us, as the law stands today, to run a full consultative process with our communities and adopt amendments to all of our long-term plans. And you would expect that whilst we have to do that as individual councils, we would do that in a regionally aligned way with our communities if we had the opportunity to pursue a Hawke's Bay Three Waters entity.
Thank you. Councillor Barber?
Yeah, thank you, Kia ora. 4.59 talks about private, rural, marae schemes that currently aren't under our watch. With the taumata Arowai, I mean, that they are making noises that could all kind of come under those standards, and those communities could need more support. Have we, looking at a regional model for Hawke's Bay, have we looked at the potential obligation that we might fall under either in Hastings and then the wider, because I'm thinking about Waikaremoana, Rauponga, there's a whole lot of rural communities that don't come under a watch of a council at the moment, and so whether we've thought about that. And just the second question is about our stormwater. Currently, I mean, it just flows into the Karamu. I mean, it's in the report. Have we, going forward, are we modelling that we would fix that, or are we saying that any entity going forward regionally, we just kind of status quo around the stormwater issues, because it's a major issue, has been forever. We're all aware of it. It needs to be solved. Hapua Niue, we have been saying it for a long time. So I just, thank you.
Through you, Worship, and I will hand to Craig Hugh to comment in more detail. As you recall, last year, the individual councils received Three Waters stimulus through the Phase 1 funding. One of the choices that we made as a region was to pursue some regional investment, and one of those was around an assessment on private water supplies, and I'll get Mr. Tu to talk to where that work is currently at, and also the questions that you've raised around stormwater, other than acknowledging that, again, as you're aware, we adopted a long-term plan recently that has $250 million worth of capital investment across Three Waters over the next 10 years. It's probably not enough in the stormwater space, but Craig can talk to both the private water assessment standards and work that we're doing, and also stormwater. So, Mr. Thu.
Thank you. Thanks, Craig.
Your Worship. So if I start first of all with the private water supplies, you're correct, Councillor Barber. The Water Services Bill, which on Tuesday had its third reading, so we'll get we'll get assent likely in the next week or two, and that will transfer powers across to Tamata Arawai away from the DHBs and Ministry of Health, but also livens up the clauses that have been included into that, which extends from a drinking water side the coverage of the water standards to much smaller suppliers. They have a number of years in which to comply, and through the second reading of that bill, that was extended out to 7 years. So what the region has done out of the stimulus funds is we pulled together funds to do a research investigation project on a couple of fronts. First of all is to consider to better assess for the Hawke's Bay region and for each individual council, how many private water supplies might we really have? I think latest Te Mata Arawai DIA estimates are somewhere in the order of 95,000, 95,000 across the country. And so we're trying to hone in on how many are in Hawke's Bay. But almost more importantly in this first stage of the project is an investigation on methodology, is actually how do we engage with the community, because some people aren't going to want to talk to someone around what's going on with their private supply. So we're doing some work with some consultants at the moment, designing around how do we talk to the different audiences, because they're not all the same. The discussion out with the marae and the Papakoinga is not the same for a big station up on the foothills where they've got shearers' quarters and so forth. That work will flow through into next year, and it's still early part of the design. What we're also working with, though, is Te Mata Arawai representative and trying to get early briefs of what they're calling acceptable solutions. The concept of the acceptable solutions for these private supplies is if you are under 500 and then very small is under 50, you won't need to go and do a water safety plan, you won't need to go and do all source protection and source risk management plan, a whole lot of compliance stuff that quite rightly we would have to do, as long as you install A, B, C, D and E. Next year, Te Mata Arawai will be looking to consult the community on those draft concepts, and I would suggest there'll be lots of toing and froing before those standards are finalised. So that's to try and make it cheaper. So in the private water supply, also government has put aside, but not yet fully released, a $30 million fund for small communities. I understand there is a trial going on up in Tairāwhiti around some of their mechanisms around how to issue that funding. But also in some of the funding we have regionally, and we're just putting some scope to come back to the councils on, is if we're doing this private water supply assessment on a sample, what if you find something? So using a small grant scheme in a similar vein to our rural halls around, hey, we've got some money, if you've got some money, just to help people do a little bit of work or help pay for some testing. So we're looking at what we can do to build that relationship. But it is a big unknown, and that's why the paper we felt a need to highlight. We don't know what that liability is working through. In terms of stormwater, the Chief Executive has covered it off correctly. We have some allowance, and there will be papers coming to you soon around upgrades to the stormwater system around Caroline Road, both from a flow, but also proposals to look at treatment and wetland polishing to work through that. Obviously with the freshwater management NPS for that coming through the regional tank plan change, we will end up having to invest more than we've currently got in the LTP. So one absolute thing is sure is our stormwater will cost more than we've forecasted, which goes to those comments around we don't know what the standards are and also what the gap is. The various independent review for government talked about that the modelling was adequate to show the direction of travel. And in the report we've highlighted that the bigger you get, there are efficiencies you gain. What is completely unclear in the peer review that government had done on the WICS modelling is the size of that difference is uncertain. And obviously if you're left with a conversation with your community around how effective and how efficient, that size is really important, or likely size is a really important part of that conversation.
So the work that's been done in Tairāwhiti as a pilot, Craig, when will we have the information that is coming back from that for us to consider?
I'm trying to find out more. All I'm aware of is something's been trialled.
Okay.
We're trying to get as much information as we can.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr?
Thank you, Worship. Thank you for that previous question, because that leads on to what I was wanting to ask about. So I just want to make sure that in our submission we capture the concerns around the capital expenditure. And in reading the recommendations, I'm not sure that they do, but if they do, or if they don't, can we make sure that we capture that sense of 1.9 billion versus hundreds of millions? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. That's noted. Councillor Redstone.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question probably follows on from Councillor Barber as well. It's over wastewater, the likelihood of the discharge to ocean being changed, and whether we've actually modelled, or whether the WICS model has accounted for a possible land-based treatment.
We simply, through you, Your Worship, don't know that. We know that the WICS model, as much as we understand it, it's not based on the extensive RFI information that we provided based on our own assets and asset condition and investment. So, and those standards, haven't been set. I think, as we've discussed previously, if you were using reference points at the moment and we couldn't operate East Clive, we would look to collaborate with Napier, but you'd be talking about something in the order of $500 to $700 million if you had to have a land-based, waste treatment. But that's still a long way off 1.9 billion. So we, as I've said previously, we've asked questions that we haven't had a response to, and we cannot, all of the engineers, comprehend what that number is based on.
Mr. Thu, what is our consent for our wastewater treatment plant?
We have a 35-year consent. Next year, we're up for next year, or the year after, sorry, it's in the paper, up for its first 9-year review.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Okay, so no further questions or comments. Councillor Nixon.
To make comment, not a question.
Certainly.
From the minute the government released this proposal, I've struggled to understand the core logic behind it. This is what we're told. The new organisation will employ everybody who's currently employed in the Three Waters environment in the various councils around the country. No job losses. Everybody remains more or less where they are geographically. At the same time, this organisation is going to employ, by the government's standard, 5,800 to 9,300 additional staff. That's quite a number. At the same time, and they never mention this, we know that there's going to be a lot of stranded assets, because we've already discussed this. This is cost that the council currently pays for, but won't transfer, like accounting costs, HR, you name it, it's all in there. And we don't actually know what it was. I think a figure of about 5 or 6 million was mentioned the other day, but I'm not holding anybody to that. And then I look at what's happening in our roads. We have an engineering operation that is highly coordinated. When we do roads up, we replace all the Three Water pipes and so on. Now, we already know what happens with our power company, our communication company. No sooner do we make a nice road that they come along and dig it up. And what worries me particularly is this is going to get worse under this new organisation, because we're still in charge of the roads and keeping that side of things in order. Yet we're going to have yet another organisation capable of coming along and starting to uproot everything in order to meet their needs. And so just looking at those staff numbers for a start, I mean, I can't, if you say each person can be paid, I don't know, $100,000 each, that's probably a fairly conservative figure, nearly 10,000 additional staff, the amount of money is just huge. I can't do the sums very quickly. I think is that $1 billion of roughly of extra cost. And yet we have been promised this whole thing's going to be cheaper than it is now, cheaper than we can do it on our own. So this has concerned me from the outset. I want to save this to last because it's the thing that actually has been bugging me from start to finish. And I do intend to support the council's recommendation. We have three possibilities: go with the government, do it ourselves as one council. I'm not actually against that. Or combine with the other councils, which I think is going to be more acceptable to government because it's part of the way to what they're suggesting. So I can't support the government's proposal. I do support the two options of either our own council or a combined council for Hawke's Bay. I can't remember who raised the question, but no, I won't ask that question. I'll just make the comment. Te Whātiri, how do you say it?
Tairāwhiti. Yeah.
Gisborne, I call it. Are potentially part of this organisation, and yet we haven't really discussed them at any great deal. I just leave that as a sort of open point. I don't need an answer right now.
I'll just comment a couple of times. Tairāwhiti in terms of being included in Hawke's Bay, is that your question?
Yep.
So yes, we have had a meeting with the Mayor and the Chief Executive of the Gisborne District Council to consider what an option could be to include Tairāwhiti. And as you know, across all our government agencies at the moment, Tairāwhiti, whether it's tertiary, whether it's government agencies, Hawke's Bay and Tairāwhiti work very closely together. So we've had the initial conversation.
That's great. I am prepared to move the motion to go with
Thank you. And if I can just add another comment to your statement, Councillor Nixon, and that is the value of the regional entity, that all those things you highlighted. Hastings has got an incredible staff water team since the Havelock North water crisis to share with the region. How many do we have, Craig, when delivering our water now, our infrastructure and our delivery service? About 27 staff. Now, it's not going to be easy for anybody to gather up some experts in New Zealand to bring a team together. So that is a very strong point for the regional model. Another very strong point for the regional model, which you've highlighted, is as telecoms, as power companies, as contractors, we all work together now. And we, and so having that dedicated team delivering all new assets, all new infrastructure, that sits very well with the regional model because we're doing that now. And so we're not redigging up roads and things like that. So it's a whole team approach, and that bodes well for the Hawke's Bay model.
Thank you.
Councillor Sears.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I do want to acknowledge and speak a little bit about the case for change. While our community, quite rightly, have been very focused on the ownership of our infrastructure and the cost, I think it's really important to acknowledge that this reform is driven by a desire to care for our water, and this is three waters. And it is actually a reality all around New Zealand that raw sewage is being discharged into our freshwater rivers and into our sea. Our stormwater discharges around New Zealand, it's no individual council, are unacceptable. We are polluting our waters. We need to look after our source water. Actually, water matters deeply and fundamentally. You say it's an emotional issue, Your Worship, around our ownership of infrastructure. Of course it is. Actually, it's also deeply emotional for me because if we're not caring for our water, actually our future is, for everybody, for humans, for our land, it's really compromised. So we do a lot of talking actually about the details and the infrastructure and the money, but I just do want to comment and acknowledge the water and the fundamental drive by government, which I commend to take on a reform which, like you say, is huge, but I believe so very important. So while I'm not disputing that the details of how this rolls out for us is important, I do think our community need to really understand that the driver behind this is a care for the water in its entirety.
Thank you, Sophie. Water is our taonga for Heri-taonga, and it is the lifeblood of our community, and that is a fundamental driver for any future change and well-being of our people.
Like on your worship,
I'm happy to move the recommendations. I have a seconder, Councillor Nixon, and I'll just take some other speakers. Sorry, Councillor Sholem.
Thank you, Worship. One of the things that I'd really like to acknowledge that's come out of this report and how we're proposing proceeding forward is that none of what we have in this report is about patch protection. This is about looking at a model that has been proposed and identifying that while on the surface, although we're digging into the data, it shows financial efficiencies, it doesn't go deep enough into the wider reaching well-beings that we need to consider as local government. And I really do want to acknowledge the leadership that's been shown by Mayor Sandra and also our CE, Nigel Buckle, as well as our staff, because there's been a real focus and a drive on finding what's right for our community, but also the water. The water is a top priority. Unlike other councillors who have come out immediately and said, no, we're just out, and not really shared rationale or taken the time to really dig in, I feel very confident that this council has taken the time to do that, and our feedback reflects that. So I would just like to take this opportunity to acknowledge all the work that's gone into that and the leadership that's been shown. I support the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Sholem. Councillor Barber?
Yeah, kia ora tātou. Yeah, no, I support the kōrero on our water. Came onto the council on the back of the Havelock crisis, that election, and water was the big take. For me, having an opportunity to to look through the kōrero, and I'm looking at 6.4 there, where it kind of lays out. I think this is probably the crux of the paper, and it can be understood very easily by someone looking at it. You've got three options. We're not here to make a decision today, but we are here to put the information in front of the council and give feedback. But if I'm looking at that there, it shows there's three options, and there's a huge difference between the scale of the burden on whoever's going to be paying the water bills at the end of the day. So affordability, and I know it came back as the number one priority from our feedback to the community. And if I think about some of our not so well off parts of our community, and our Māori community and our Pacifica community feature right across that broad spectrum of those that are less well off, less able to afford some of these prices. So I'll just say that I appreciate the paper. I think it's given a good balanced view of each of the proposals, and there will be an opportunity, I guess, to get more information. And we've put in a whole lot of questions. We need the answers so we can make a decision whenever that time comes in the future. So I think we're not here to make a decision. I just want to acknowledge the council, your worship, Nigel, Craig, and the team for at least equipping us with the information that we need. When it gets down to the sharp end of having to make a decision about where we go. So, huri no tēnā tātou. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Baden. Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Yes, I fully agree that things have got to change. The government proposal that councils have been asked to submit on is very, very complicated, and it's very complex. It lacks the necessary facts to make any decisions. It takes control away from the ratepayers who have paid for the assets over generations. It also cross-subsidises. So our ratepayers in Flaxmere will be expected to fund some of the water sewage problems that Wellington has. How fair is that? The ratepayers have clearly told us that they want to be fully informed and have a referendum, and I agree with them. What we seem to have to date is a minefield in front of us. So I fully support the recommendations, congratulate all of those, the authors behind it. The Hawke's Bay alternative, to me, is the best way to go.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Councillor Lawson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, I fully support the recommendations. I think this council, as well as the community, all agree that there's a case for change to ensure that there's safe, efficient and affordable free water services, and our community consultation supports that. They also are concerned about affordability and the fact that it's a safe and efficient delivery of the three waters. I would just like to also mention, though, that I want to be assured that our feedback to the government will be a strong message, that it's, you know, that they actually realise that we're very serious about what we're saying, and that our proposal for a regional approach is really taken seriously.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Lawson. Councillor Kerr?
Thanks, Your Worship. I agree with all the previous speakers, but one little piece that came through that surprised me is the number of rural people that provide their own water also have been incredibly engaged in this process. So although if they're providing their own water, they may not be funding the town supply directly, they too do not want to see something that they see as our community's asset being moved away out of local control, local management and local ownership.
Thank you very much. Absolute point. Agree with that. Councillor Watkins. Oh, yes. Oh, I was going to say, I thought,
Sorry.
oh, you're blonde.
I'm trying to be very efficient. Likewise, I fully support our council's approach and also the regional approach. However, I do want to remind our community, and this is based on the multitude of emails that we received, is pretty much templated emails from the Taxpayers Union, that it was local leadership and local decision making that neglected the warning signs as far back as 1998 to the Havelock North water contamination crisis. Not only in Havelock North but also in Flaxmere. And it was previous Hastings district councillors that decided not to invest in much needed water infrastructure and opted for glory projects above the ground. We now say that water is our number one priority, and I absolutely believe it is, and this council here has led some fantastic direction in that space, and that has been from a governance level, enabling our staff to get on and do the job with the money that we have invested in it. So I just like to remind the community that are listening to this that how the predicament that we got ourselves into in the first place. Thank you.
Could I, through your worship, just make one comment? I think that there is some of that narrative across New Zealand about whether councils have made the necessary sort of investments. And I suppose the point that I would make is that the things that we absolutely support going forward is clear and higher standards around our three waters, that we have an independent and well-resourced drinking water regulator, which has been established, that there is an economic regulator. And so whilst I acknowledge that there's probably, over history, some of those concerns across councils across New Zealand, I think some of those fundamental elements of the Three Waters reform coming out of the inquiry that will be in place going forward you would have to say, provides a system that has much stronger provisions that, you know, whatever this process is for going forward, whether it's a regional Three Waters entity or councils opting out and going their own, the ability to not be able to meet standards and demonstrate that you're making the necessary investments. I think the conditions are slightly different in the structure that we have now than we had 2 decades ago. Remembering that whilst I wasn't here, and I know how emotional it was for everybody at the time in Havelock North, is that we were compliant with the drinking water standards that existed at the time.
Thank you, Nigel. Councillor Watkins, last speaker.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, I totally support the recommendation. Government's got to front up to some questions and give us the answers. And I think there's going to be a long journey between us and government. All long journeys start with the first step, and I see this as the first step.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Just before I put the motion, thank you, everyone. I know you, in the last 8 weeks you have received a lot of emails and taken them and listened to our community and we've been responding together. And I thank you for the time, because this is really, really important for our people. As the recommendation says, that water is a tonga, the lifeblood of our people and our whenua, and that's where this starts. And how we look after, well, we've got $250 million for the next 10 years in our LTP as Hastings District Council to deliver for our ratepayers. We don't know what we're facing. And for us to be able to unite and work regionally as Hawke's Bay, to look at, we cross the same rivers. We know the condition of our rivers. We know the condition of our assets across the region. And we want to make sure that we are testing all assumptions and modelling, continue to do that work for Hawke's Bay. Have the government give us a chance to be able to see if we can take this and share our resources and deliver this together as a region. And that's what our submission will be saying, and that's what it'll be highlighting. So it is about, this is a huge, huge journey. This is just the beginning of it. And this is the next steps will be where the Cabinet takes the direction, but we will be putting our best foot forward in our submission to show that, give us a chance, can we do a regional model, allow us to work together and be united to understand our own needs for our own people. Kia ora koutou katoa. I'll put the recommendation now. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you, carried unanimously. That concludes this. And as everybody has said, I know, Craig and your team, how hard you've worked on this. Can I acknowledge from the chair the amazing work that you have done. It's the tireless work, actually. You're always here late. You work with your team so hard. Not only have we put the pressures on you since Havelock North to deliver a very, very ambitious strategy, a very ambitious 5-year strategy, but now we've asked you to look at a government reform and see what is the best model for our people going forward. This is massive for us, and we're very grateful to have you and your team working for us. Kia ora. I now move to back to agenda item 6. Welcome, Vicky, and this is the Community Board. No, sorry, I'm not. I'm going back to 5. 2021, Louise, our meeting schedule changes. Any questions or comments on those changes to our meeting schedule? Thank you. Moved by Councillor Nixon, seconded by Councillor Watkins. All those in favour, please say aye. Any against? Thank you, that's carried. Moving now to item 6, welcome Vicky, and this is the Rural Community Board recommendations, and I'd like to start with our Rural Community Board representation councillors to speak to these recommendations. Councillor Kerr and Councillor Sears, thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Sophie and I just quickly collaborated there with iLooks, and I'll speak to this. So the rural recycling facilities, we want to progress these and roll them out, and we give feedback to the staff about whether the site's suitable, or, as we know our communities very well, whether we go, maybe not. But we are very clear on any trials that are run, what success looks like. So that's rolling out nicely. We did put some security cameras out around a rural area alongside a busy road to capture both the road traffic as well as the recycling site. That was not a success. Some nice person in our community came and took the camera, the equipment, the pole, the lot. We have no evidence of who they were because they took the evidence with them. So as a result, we have deemed that trial was not successful and will not be rolling out with ratepayers funding. If communities still wish to fund their own cameras, then we can provide the expertise and the support and maybe the storage of the data. And thirdly, we looked at the Greater Communities Strategic Overview and gave some feedback on that. And we had Rural Community Board members express interest on standing on committees, which you'll see in the next paper. So a really positive meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Sears, do you want to add anything? No? Okay, so you happy to move the recommendations and second them? Thank you. Moved by Councillor Kerr, second Councillor Sears. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you. Thank you for that update. Now we move on to amendments of appointments to committees and subcommittees and external organisations. And this is to include rural community. Oh, sorry.
Yep, you're right.
Is this speakers on this paper? Mm-hmm. Yes, good. Right. Starting with Councillor Kerr.
Just a repeat of what I said, but to acknowledge that I have spoken to the chair of the committee and was very happy. This Greater Communities meeting.
Thank you.
Committee.
Councillor Sholem.
Thank you, Worship. Just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge what a wonderful move I think this is, and we really look forward to having that voice in district development in particular, and very happy to move the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Sholem. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Sort of the first I heard of it was obviously in these papers, so just got a question around, aren't the current rural ward councillors representing the rural communities anyway? So I'm just trying to understand the layers here, please.
Thank you. Oh, Mr. Cameron, are you speaking to that? No? No?
He looked like he was.
Who would like to speak to that? Councillor Kerr, could you just answer that question, please,
Okay.
Councillor Harvey?
Often, I can only speak personally, if I'm part of a committee, I tend to look at it from a whole council perspective. Mm-hmm. And I think by having a community board member, they're going to be looking at anything brought to us very much from their small rural community. So yes. I think they add to it. I don't think there's any disadvantages. They are non-voting members, so they're able to ask questions, they're able to provide feedback, but they're not involved in any voting, which then comes back through us.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Sears?
Just to add, Rural Community Board doesn't meet nearly as regularly, obviously, as Council. And I think a big part of this is also an opportunity for the Rural Community Board members to grow capacity and understanding of what's happening in Council, which in turn actually gives a huge advantage to the Rural Community Board. Mm. So that's another side to it. We've got members who are very interested and excited to understand more and learn more about the whole of Council, which we felt would enhance the capacity within the Rural Community Board.
Thank you. Councillor Dawson, of Great Communities, who will have Jonathan from the Maikakaho's community.
Yes. Thank you, Your Worship. Look, I'd like to second the motion. I'm fully supportive of this. I think it provides a real opportunity to have the rural community's voice directly around the table. So it's rather than being sort of once removed, it's right there. So fully supportive. I can't see any disadvantages. So yes, very happy to second.
Thank you. And, you know, the board members, you know, I mean, it's more time for them and they are really keen. So it's really exciting for them to be included in this process. Councillor Redstone.
Thank you, Your Worship. I must admit I didn't know about this until I read the papers either, but that's no problem at all. I'm very pleased to have Jonathan included on our committee and have his input, and as a non-voting member, I think his input will be invaluable. We have had quite a few discussions already, so yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks Councillor Redstone. So I have a mover. The mover was, the seconder was Councillor Lawson. The mover was Councillor Mover was Councillor Sholem, seconder Councillor Lawson. All those in favour, please say aye. Any against? Thank you, that's carried. Item number 8, and this is the proposed Tier 1 reserve acquisition. Councillor Harvey has left the room as he has declared a conflict of interest. Thank you. I now invite the authors, Kirsty and Mr Hosford, to come forward and present this paper. Thank you. Welcome to you both.
Bishop and councillors, my first statement is I'll take the report as read. You're all well aware of the issues that we've gone through in this paper contains, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. And I'd like to now welcome the ward councillors for this area, starting with Councillor Redstone, then Councillor Corbyn, to speak about the work that has gone on, because you've been part of this right from the outset. So I'll start with Councillor Redstone. If you could give your account of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. This has been a very interesting and at times quite arduous journey, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank Colin and Kirsty and the team for this outcome, which I believe satisfies our community's wants and desires. We had a consultation process and 98% of people actually wanted this outcome, but we've added to that with the addition of a hard court on the storm detention area, so everything's been achieved that everyone could want, and I'd be more than happy to move the recommendations in that case. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Redstone. Councillor Corbyn, welcome. You have also been part of this whole process.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, it's been a long process and a difficult process. I want to congratulate Colin and Nigel where they've got to with this paper. I would like to second the recommendation. I think it satisfies all of the interests that are involved, and it comes in within the budget that Council's had in its long-term plan and community plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corbyn. The councillor's here? No. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have one question, and maybe I haven't read this correctly, but in 5.3 it says delay Chatham Park upgrade, but in the recommendation it's Rongeorgi Park. Can I just have some clarification on that?
Councillor, that is an error. While we were looking at juggling the, what would you call it, the renewal budgets around, we will be sitting with, where are we? Where we, in fact, subsequent to the report, we worked, the other money we had, there's money available for Bridge Park, and we were looking at delaying the Ron Georgie one to allow the Bridge Park one to be done, but in saying so, there's a community plan working on Bridge Park at the moment as well, so there is probably some logic, absolute logic, in waiting until the community plan comes out with its final findings. So I think that what we would suggest an amendment to actually defer the renewal of either Ron Georgie or Bridge Park. Only in saying is I think we need a little bit more flexibility just to actually make the right decision, because if the community in Bridge Park has got a reserve has got a reserve which is in a very out-of-the-way place with a playground on it, and they're talking about some bigger plans for having a more active area within Bridge Park, and we, as staff, we would suggest you probably just need a little bit of flexibility there to get the right decision, rather than jump in, do Bridge Park, and then find the community, in our consultation with the community, they actually say, well, actually, why don't, let's tie-ho. So I guess we're asking for a bit of flexibility there. We can make it happen, and we would come back to you with a final decision on which one would be deferred.
Well, that was a big explanation. Are you comfortable with that, Councillor Lawson? Good spotting. Councillor Barber.
Yeah, kia ora. Thanks, Colin. Can you remind me how much we would contribute to the hardcourt surfaces? And I guess my question is, what's the ballpark figure for that type of development? We're talking a tennis court and a basketball court from memory.
It was approximately $150,000. Yes. That's the estimate for it. The contribution is.
So Colin, if I start, just to lift this up to a big picture level, we have $900,000 in our long-term plan, $720,000 that was specifically for the acquisition of land and small neighbourhood playground in the Te Wonga terraces. We have, off the extensive work that was referenced by Councillor Redstone and Corbyn, had a very clear brief from the community. What was important is that we softened the visual impact of the proposed new developments on Clifton Road, that we had sufficient money to invest in more than just a renewal of an existing playground in the domain, and that's $300,000, and that whatever balance was left, which will be circa $145,000, is the contribution that we will make towards the hard courts going in on our reserve, capped at that amount, with an agreement with the developer that any costs over and above that will be met by the developer. So we went into it with the outcomes being within the $900,000 that we have in the LTP. How did we deliver a new playground for the Te Wonga domain, soften the visual impact of the first house in the development, and also get some additional amenity, and have made that agreement with the balance of funding that we have left that will be capped at that amount, and any cost to deliver those hard courts, tennis courts, basketball courts and cricket nets would be met by the developer. So it's all achieved within the 900,000 we have.
Yeah, no, cool. Through you, Your Worship, I get that, and that's very clear. What I'm trying to gauge is, it's going to be a private-public partnership around those courts. I'm trying to gauge. Well, I know what the public contribution is going to be, around 150,000. I'm trying to gauge how much the private contribution would be. If you got any ideas. So I mean, what?
Is that correct, Mr.
Oh yeah, just kind of estimates, because how much does it cost to build a basketball court in a I'm just trying to gauge what we're talking about here.
It's approximately 145,000, 150,000 to do all the hardcore areas.
Oh, so we'd cover it in our own budget?
No. So again, if I can just lift this up to be really, really clear. So there is a $900,000 budget in the long-term plan. $720,000 of that is specifically for investment in Te Wonga terraces. That is our obligation out of the Environment Court decision that was made for the acquisition of land and the development of playground facilities within the and we had the balance of that was left was $150,000 for renewals of Te Wonga playground and $30,000 for some. So we've lifted this back and said, look, if we keep this at a macro level, there's $900,000 available in the long-term plan that needs to satisfy a series of outcomes. The community's desire for a decent playground in Te Wonga domain, And our obligations through a mediated settlement to the Environment Court to acquire some land and to invest in facilities. So we are delivering, obviously, reduced visual impacts, amenities on the reserve within Te Wonga Downs without having to acquire a piece of land, and to invest more than terraces, and more than we had provisioned in the long-term plan for investment in the playground at Te Wonga Domain.
So Councillor Barber, you're comfortable with that? Because I think it's early stages of understanding the full costs, detailed design, and all those sorts of things.
I get the big picture that Nigel's talking about, and I totally what we're achieving. I'm just trying to gauge, what I asked, but maybe that'll come out when we know that detail.
Thank you. Councillor Sears?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, just yes or no question to the local councillors. What we're agreeing to here is slightly different to what went out to consultation. You're absolutely confirming that what's proposed here is acceptable to the community. I know it's better, but yes, you're confirming that 100%. Good. And then so back to you then, Colin, please. Eileen's question, just trying to be very clear. Flaxmere will wait an extra year for their skate park, or Bridge Power will wait an extra year for their playground? No.
No, hold on. Sorry. Correction. Mr. Thu, would you like to answer that, please?
The skate park is not at risk. There is a small playground on Rod Georgie Park is one of those options, and the other one, as Mr. Hosford worked through his journey on, is the Bridge Power playground, which is also, we have money to do renewal. One of those two would be the funds that we would potentially use to help bring forward, and then would catch back up as the plan works through.
Just follow up, just to be really clear, Your Worship. So that's the 21-22 budget that you'll be using, and they'll be pushed then to 22-23.
Correct.
Thank you.
Just a comment from me. I have been part of this process. I have been at the public meeting and heard what the community have asked for, and the outcome that we have worked through with the developer is being able to add huge value to the Te Wonga community instead of just providing amenity and facility for a new subdivision, which is what we do across the district. In every new housing subdivision, we have a little reserve and a little playground, but what we're going to have is actually community wide usage of a new area, a new playground. And when we go out to the community to say, what do you want your playground to look like, we'll also be able to bring with them what happens on the reserve area. So yes, we've done consultation on two parts, and we'll bring the rest of it when we go out to look at the domain playground, and we'll include that reserve area to get feedback from everyone as well. But in the meantime, this is a way forward that satisfies community's aspirations, and the chairman of the Cape View community, Tom Evers-Swindell, spoke to me at our launch of our wall revetment the other day, and our blessing, and he thanked everybody for the hard work that's gone into this process. So just wanted to pass that on. Okay, so I have a mover and a seconder. No further comments. Councillor Kerr.
Just process that the mover and seconder accept the changes of the name of the playgrounds that may be deferred.
And Sholem and Councillor Corbyn, you happy with that? Okay, I'm putting those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you. That is carried. Well done. Now we'll take a break, and that will conclude our meeting. And thank you everybody for your input. Thank you for the incredibly hard work by staff, and these projects have taken a long time. And the water project has taken a very short time.